The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and sealed. It slid across the Ashford dining table on Thanksgiving evening with the quiet precision of something that had been rehearsed. Sutton's hand was behind it, her nails short and pale, her smile the same smile she always wore when she believed she was being generous. The envelope stopped in front of Claire's plate, just to the left of the cranberry sauce. "We just need a signature before dessert," Sutton said. "Nothing complicated." The table held 12 people. Preston's aunts and cousins filled the far end, most of them mid-conversation, the way people are when they have been doing this particular dinner for enough years that the ritual carries itself. Georgette sat at the head, her silver blonde hair set perfectly, her posture the posture of a woman who had never once questioned whether she belonged in a room. Harlan was to her right, working through his turkey without looking up. Bart Neely, Preston's college friend, sat across from Claire and watched the envelope land with the expression of a man who had just realized he was not as invisible as he had hoped. Preston sat beside Claire. He was looking at the centerpiece. Claire set her fork down. She placed her right hand flat on the envelope. She did not open it. She did not speak. She simply sat, very still and breathed, and looked at the table in front of her the way she looked at a problem she already knew the answer to. This was the room. This was always the room. She had been sitting at this table for 3 years. The first Thanksgiving she had come to this house, she had worn a green wrap dress and brought a sweet potato pie she had made from scratch, and Georgette had thanked her and then set it on the sideboard and never served it. The second year, she had stopped bringing things. The third year, she had started bringing a different kind of thing entirely. A folder at the bottom of her bag. Documents she had spent 4 months preparing. Nobody at this table knew that. She looked at Preston. He was still looking at the centerpiece. His jaw was set the way it set when he wanted to say something and was deciding not to. She knew that jaw. She had learned early in their marriage that when it did that, the thing he was deciding not to say was not going to be said. Not tonight. Not in this room. Not with his mother at the head of the table. That was the thing about Preston. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had spent 36 years learning that the most comfortable option was always the one that required the least confrontation. You did not confront Georgette. You did not question Harlan. You married the woman you loved, and then you brought her to this table, and you let the table do what it did because the alternative cost more than you had ever had to pay before. The cost had been Claire's. She thought about the first time she had met Georgette, 18 months before the wedding, at a dinner in this same house in this same dining room. Georgette had asked where Claire was from. Baltimore, Claire had said. Georgette had smiled and asked what Claire's family did. And Claire had said, quietly and precisely, that her mother was a retired school principal and her father had worked at a shipyard for 30 years. And Georgette had said, "How lovely," in the specific tone that meant the opposite of that, and then had asked Preston about a golf tournament. Nobody at that table had asked Claire what she did. She had built a company by then. She had been running Sentinel Arc for 4 years. She had 31 employees and a federal contract worth $68 million and a security clearance that most people in that room would not have been able to obtain. She had sat at Georgette's table and eaten her food and answered the questions she was asked and waited for someone to ask the right one. No one ever did. She had decided, somewhere around the second year, that she was not going to volunteer it. She had decided this with the same cool clarity she brought to business decisions. The Ashfords had formed their opinion of her before she walked through the door. She was the girl Preston had met at a charity gala, the pretty woman from Baltimore with the good posture and the quiet manner who had landed one of Connecticut's most eligible men. That was the story they had told themselves, and they were comfortable in it, and they were not going to revise it based on anything she said. So she let them keep it. She kept building. By the time Sutton slid the envelope across the table, Sentinel Arc was valued at $3.2 billion. Claire held a controlling interest. The company had 3 active federal contracts. Its satellite-link security architecture was used by 4 defense agencies and 2 allied foreign governments. The company's investment subsidiary, Lattice Point Capital, held positions in 14 infrastructure funds across the eastern seaboard. One of those funds was the primary lender on Harlan Ashford's Meridian Tower properties. Claire knew this. She had known it for 6 months. She sat at the Thanksgiving table with her hand on the cream-colored envelope and the folder at the bottom of her bag, and she thought, not yet. "It is just a formality," Georgette said from the head of the table. Her voice was pleasant the way it was always pleasant. "The family attorney drafted it. We just want to make sure everything is structured properly going forward." "Of course," Claire said. She picked up her water glass and drank. She set it back down. She looked at Sutton. "I will read it tonight," she said. Sutton's smile did not move. "We were hopping to do it now, before the evening gets away from us." "I'm sure you were," Claire said. And she went back to her dinner. Claire Beaumont had grown up in a row house in Baltimore's Waverly neighborhood, 12 minutes from the library where she had spent most of her childhood. Her mother, Denise, had been a third-grade teacher and then a principal. Her father, Raymond, had worked at the Bethlehem Steel Shipyard for 28 years until the yard shut down, and then had driven school buses until he retired. They were not wealthy people. They were people who believed in specificity and effort and the careful use of what you had. These were exactly the right things to believe in when you were the kind of mind Claire turned out to be. She had a full scholarship to MIT at 17. She studied electrical engineering and then stayed for a graduate degree in systems architecture. She was not the loudest person in any of her programs. She was the one who understood the problem before the professor finished writing it on the board and had already started considering the second-order implications. Judge Wallace Bream had come to speak at an MIT Defense Technology Forum in her second graduate year. He was a retired federal judge who had spent 10 years on a federal advisory board for defense procurement. He was looking for graduate students to place in a fellowship program that put engineers inside federal contracting agencies for 12 months. Claire had approached him after the panel. She had asked 2 questions that stopped him mid-sentence. He had given her his card. The fellowship had placed her inside a defense agency in Arlington, Virginia, where she had spent 12 months learning how the government bought technology and, more importantly, how consistently it bought the wrong version of it. The systems being procured were outdated by the time the contracts were signed. The agencies needed architecture that could adapt, that could be updated in the field without a full replacement cycle, that could communicate across platforms that had been built in different decades by different contractors who had never spoken to each other. She saw the gap. She spent 2 more years inside the agency as a civilian contractor, building the first version of what would become Sentinel Arc's core architecture. She filed 3 patents before she left. All 3 were filed under her individual name. She founded Sentinel Arc at 26 with 2 engineers she had worked with in Arlington, and a first-year lease on office space in a building in Falls Church, Virginia, that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and old coffee. She had $400,000 in savings, a 3-year business plan, and a letter of interest from a mid-level federal program office that was not quite a contract, but was enough to get started. 8 years later, she had a building of her own. She met Preston Ashford at a federal contractors charity gala in Washington. He had come with a college friend who worked at a policy think tank. He was funny and self-deprecating and asked her what she did before he told her what he did, which was rare. She told him she ran a defense technology firm. He asked what that meant in practice. She told him. He listened to the whole answer. That was the beginning of her mistake. She thought that a man who listened was a man who would keep listening. What she had not understood yet was that there was a difference between a man who was genuinely curious and a man who was performing curiosity because it worked. Preston loved her. She was certain of that, as certain as she was of most things. But love and courage were not the same thing, and she had learned over 3 years that Preston had one and not the other. His family had money the old way, inherited land, property, a name that opened certain doors in Connecticut and closed others. His father had built a commercial real estate portfolio on top of that foundation. His mother ran the family's public charity arm. His sister Sutton consulted on interior design for high-end residential clients. None of them had built anything. None of them understood what it meant to build something. When Preston brought Claire home for the first time, he had told his mother she was a defense contractor. Georgette had heard contractor and pictured someone who filed permits. She had not revised that picture because she had not tried to. Claire had decided, in the car ride back to their apartment that night, that she was going to let the picture stay. She was not going to correct it. She was not going to perform her achievements for people who had not asked to see them. She had built Sentinel Arc without anyone's approval. She was not going to need the Ashfords' approval to keep it. She had been right about that. She had been wrong about how much the silence was going to cost her. It was not one thing. It was never one thing. That was what people did not understand about the kind of erosion Claire had lived inside for 3 years. They imagined a dramatic moment, a slur, a door slammed, something clean enough to point to. What had actually happened was quieter than that, and in some ways worse. It was the accumulation of 100 small things, each one easy to explain away on its own, each one leaving a residue that did not wash off. The first year, there was a dinner in January where Harlan had spent 40 minutes describing a development project in Stamford to the table and had asked every other adult at the table for their perspective. He had asked Georgette. He had asked Preston. He had asked Sutton's boyfriend at the time. He had not asked Claire. She had sat 2 seats from him with a clear view of his face, and he had not turned in her direction once. When the conversation moved on, she had taken a long drink of water and looked at the window and made a decision about what she was and was not going to say. She said nothing. In March of the first year, Sutton had come to visit the apartment Claire shared with Preston. She had walked through the living room and stopped at Claire's desk, where a set of engineering schematics were laid out beside her laptop. She had said, "Oh, is this for a project?" And Claire had said yes. And Sutton had said, "Cute," in the way you said cute about something that was not impressive, and moved on. The schematics were for a satellite communication relay system that would later become a core component of a federal security contract worth $214 million. In October of the first year, Georgette had asked Claire, at a family dinner, whether she and Preston had thought about where they would live once they had children. Claire had said they had not decided yet. Georgette had then turned to Preston and said she thought the house in Greenwich would be a wonderful place to raise a family, and that, of course, Claire would not need to work once that happened. And Preston had nodded in the vague way he nodded at things his mother said that he did not want to engage with. Claire had finished her dinner. She had called Renata the next morning and asked her to begin preparing a summary of Sentinel Arc's projected revenue over the next 5 years. She did not explain why. Renata did not ask. That was the thing about Renata. She had worked with Claire for 6 years, and she understood that when Claire asked for something without an explanation, the explanation would become clear. The second year was more of the same, with the addition of Harlan's business advice. He had taken to offering it at family dinners, long monologues about market conditions and interest rates and the direction of commercial property values in Connecticut. He spoke with the authority of a man who had never been seriously questioned. At a dinner in February of year 2, he had said, addressing the table generally, that he did not understand why young people got into technology businesses when the margins were thin and the competition was brutal. "Nothing beats real property," he said. "Something you can see and touch." Preston had glanced at Claire. Claire had said nothing. She had thought, "The federal government has been paying me to build things you will never be able to see or touch, and those things keep people alive, and the margins are very good. She had cut her chicken. By the third year, she had stopped expecting Preston to say anything. This was the adjustment that cost her the most, because she had spent the first year hopping and the second year managing hope and the third year putting hope away. Preston was not going to stand up in the middle of a family dinner and say, "Actually, my wife runs a defense technology company. You should probably ask her something." He was not wired for it. He had grown up in a house where Georgette set the terms of every conversation, and Harlan controlled the financial picture. And standing up inside that architecture was a skill that had never been required of him, and he had never developed it. She understood this. She also understood that understanding it did not make it smaller. The thing about Preston was that when they were alone, he was the man she had fallen for. He was funny and he listened, and he asked her real questions about her work and was genuinely interested in the answers. He admired what she had built. He told her so. But admiration that stayed in a private room was not the same as respect that walked into a public one, and she had stopped pretending those were the same thing sometime in the second year. She had made her plans quietly. She had made them over months with the precision she brought to everything. She had not made them in anger. Anger was not useful. Anger made noise, and noise attracted attention before she was ready for attention. She had made them the way she made all her plans, with patience, with specificity, and with a clear-eyed assessment of what she actually wanted on the other side. What she wanted was very simple. She wanted out. And she wanted the Ashfords to understand, on the way out, exactly who they had been sitting across from. It had started with a misdirected email. The email had come to Claire's work account in April, 6 months before Thanksgiving. It was from a fund manager at a firm called Penway Infrastructure Partners. The subject line said, "Q2 Disclosure Review, Meridian Portfolio." The body of the email was 3 paragraphs, dense with financing references, and it was addressed to a compliance officer at Lattice Point Capital. Lattice Point Capital was Sentinel Arc's investment subsidiary. Clare chaired its oversight board. She had founded it 4 years prior to manage the proceeds from Sentinel Arc's growth and to build a long-term investment base for the company's pension liabilities. The email had been sent to her address by error. The fund manager had transposed 2 letters in the recipient's address and hit send. Clare had almost archived it. She had read the first paragraph instead, because the word Meridian caught her eye. The Meridian Tower properties were Harlan Ashford's flagship commercial development. She had heard him describe them at 3 separate family dinners as his most important asset. She read the full email. Then she forwarded it to Renata with a single line, "Find out what this is and call me." Renata had called her 4 hours later. The short version was this. Penway Infrastructure Partners was a fund in which Lattice Point Capital held a significant position. Penway was the primary financing vehicle for Harlan Ashford's Meridian Tower commercial development in Hartford, Connecticut. Harlan's financing was contingent on Penway's continued support. Penway's largest institutional backer, by a significant margin, was Lattice Point Capital, which meant that Harlan's development was financed, at several removes, by Clare's company. He did not know this. He had never asked. He had been borrowing against a fund for 2 years and had never traced the fund's ownership back to its ultimate institutional source, because that was not how most developers thought about their capital. You took the terms that were offered. You did not always trace the hand that offered them. Clare had sat with this for 2 days. She had not told Preston. She had not told anyone except Renata and her attorney, a woman named Dr. Patris Holt, who had been her outside counsel for 5 years. Dr. Holt had walked her through the legal picture. Disclosure was not required on Clare's side. The investment was legitimate. The relationship was several steps removed, and there was no conflict of interest that required action. But while Dr. Holt was reviewing the documents, she had noticed something else. Two of Harlan's quarterly filings with the State Commercial Real Estate Registry contained financing disclosures that did not match the actual structure of his Penway arrangement. The disclosures showed a simpler direct loan structure. The actual arrangement was more complex, and under the relevant disclosure rules, required a different form of reporting. Dr. Holt had flagged it as a possible regulatory issue. Clare had asked her to prepare a summary and hold it. Then, in June, Renata had found something else during a routine review of news related to their portfolio holdings. A financial news service had published a brief item about an ongoing SEC enforcement inquiry into commercial real estate financing practices in the Northeast. The item was vague. It mentioned no names, but it referenced the specific type of financing structure that Harlan was using. Clare had made a call. She had one contact inside the SEC's enforcement division, a professional connection from a compliance conference 3 years earlier. She had not called this contact to share information. She had called to ask a general question about how the agency typically learned about disclosure irregularities of this type. The answer had been informative. Over the following weeks, through Dr. Holt, Clare's firm had submitted a compliance self-disclosure to the relevant regulatory body, reporting the irregularity they had identified in the fund's documentation. The self-disclosure named no individuals. It reported a structural documentation issue. It was, as far as anyone could tell from the outside, a routine compliance action. What it had actually done, Clare learned in September, was provide the SEC with the final piece of documentation they needed to close an 11-month inquiry into Harlan Ashford's financing practices. The SEC had already been watching him. The self-disclosure had confirmed a specific document trail they had been missing. Clare had received a brief communication from an SEC enforcement agent named Patricia Wu in September. Agent Wu had been professionally grateful. She had asked whether Clare would be available to provide supporting documentation when the matter moved forward. Clare had said yes. She had added the date to her calendar, Thanksgiving, not because she had planned it, because that was when Agent Wu had told her the agency expected to be ready. She was awake at 5:30. The bedroom was still dark. Preston was breathing steadily beside her, one arm across his face, the way he slept when he had not had enough water the night before. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling for a few minutes. She was not anxious. She had learned, over years of preparing for high-stakes meetings and contract negotiations and federal oversight hearings, that anxiety was the product of uncertainty, and she was not uncertain. She knew what was going to happen today. She got up quietly and went to the bathroom and showered and stood in front of the closet for less than a minute before choosing. The burgundy wrap dress, flat-heeled boots in deep brown, the single piece of jewelry she wore for important things, a thin gold cuff her mother had given her when Sentinel Arc landed its first major contract. She went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat at the table with her phone. She called Renata at 7. Renata picked up on the first ring, because Renata always picked up on the first ring. "Package is ready," Renata said, before Clare could speak. "Dr. Holt confirmed the filing at 8:45 last night. The digital confirmation is in your secure folder. I printed a copy and left it in your bag with the portfolio summary." "Good," Clare said. "Agent Wu confirmed they are moving today," Renata said. "She asked me to tell you timing will depend on the warrant execution, but they expect to be in position by early evening." "Understood." "How are you?" Renata asked. "Ready," Clare said. There was a pause. Renata had been with her for 6 years. She understood what that word meant when Clare said it in this particular tone. "He doesn't know," Renata said. "It was not a question." "No," Clare said. "Are you going to tell him before?" "No," Clare said. "It is not his to know before." Renata said nothing for a moment. Then, "Okay, call me when you are on the road back." Claire said she would. She sat with her coffee for another 20 minutes. She thought about her mother who had called on Tuesday and asked what she was wearing to the Ashfords. She had described the dress and her mother had said, "Good, you always look right in that color." She thought about Judge Bream who had sent her a short message 3 days ago that said only, "I am proud of you." He did not know the specifics of today. He knew enough. She heard Preston on the stairs. He came into the kitchen in his robe, hair unsettled, looking the way he always looked before coffee in the morning, younger than he was and not quite all the way awake. He looked at her and blinked. "You're dressed already," he said. "I was up early." He poured coffee and leaned against the counter. He was looking at her with the expression she had learned to recognize over 3 years, the expression that meant he was aware that something was different and was choosing not to pursue it. "Are you ready for today?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He nodded. He looked at his mug. "My mother called yesterday," he said. "She was talking about the house in Greenwich again, for when we have kids." Claire set her cup down. "Preston," she said. "I know," he said. "I know, I just want today to go smoothly. That is all I want." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "Me too." She meant that. She just meant something different by smoothly. She picked up her bag. She checked by feel that the folder was inside. It was. She was ready. Claire read the postnuptial agreement at the Thanksgiving table, while 12 people watched. She read it carefully and completely. She turned each page slowly and read every line. She did this partly because she needed to know exactly what was in it, and partly because the act of reading it at the table, without reacting, without rushing, was itself a statement. It was 4 pages. The first 2 pages established definitions and described the marital assets under consideration. The third page was the operative section. It required Claire to waive any claim to assets Preston held prior to the marriage, which was standard, but it also contained a clause that required her to waive any claim to business assets that were, and this was the language that mattered, jointly developed or jointly supported during the period of the marriage. Jointly supported. That phrase had been chosen carefully by someone who understood that Preston had been present in Claire's life during the period when Sentinel Arc had grown from a small firm to a major company. The clause was designed to create an argument, if the marriage ended, that Preston's presence constituted joint support of Claire's professional growth, and therefore entitled the Ashford family to a share of assets Claire had built entirely on her own. It was not going to hold up in court. Dr. Holt had told her that clearly, but it would cost money and time, and more importantly, it would require Claire to disclose the full scope of Sentinel Arc's assets in a legal proceeding, which would be a significant operational disruption. That was what the Ashfords wanted, not the money, the disruption, the leverage. Claire set the last page down. She looked up. The table had gone quieter in the way tables went quiet when they were pretending not to be watching. Sutton was cutting her turkey. Georgette was lifting her wine glass. Harlan was looking at her for the first time all evening. "I have a question," Claire said. She looked at Harlan. "The Meridian Tower properties," she said. "The commercial development in Hartford. The financing on those properties, is it disclosed correctly in your Q3 and Q4 filings with the state registry?" The table went completely quiet. Harlan set his fork down. Something moved across his face that he covered quickly, the way someone covered a stumble. "I am not sure what relevance that has to this conversation," he said. "It may have quite a bit," Claire said. She reached into her bag. She set her folder on the table. She opened it and removed a single sheet, a 1-page summary from Lattice Point Capital's portfolio management team. Clean formatting. Her firm's letterhead at the top. She placed it on the table and slid it toward Harlan. He did not touch it. "Lattice Point Capital is an investment subsidiary," Claire said. She spoke to the table clearly, without hurry. It holds a significant institutional position in Penway Infrastructure Partners. Penway is the primary financing vehicle for the Meridian Tower portfolio. She paused. Lattice Point Capital is a subsidiary of Sentinel Arc Defense Technologies. Silence. Sentinel Arc is my company, Claire said. I am its founder and majority shareholder. It is currently valued at $3.2 billion. We hold 3 active federal defense contracts, 2 federal security framework licenses, and positions in 14 infrastructure funds on the eastern seaboard. Georgette's wine glass was halfway to her mouth. What I am telling you, Claire said, is that the primary institutional backer of the fund that finances your most significant commercial development is a company that I own, and the postnuptial agreement you just asked me to sign contains a clause that would give this family a legal claim against my company's assets. She looked at Sutton. I will not be signing this, she said. Sutton opened her mouth. I would also recommend, Claire said, that no one at this table say anything in the next few minutes that they would not want repeated in a legal context. She picked up her water glass and drank. Georgette recovered first. She always did. It was a skill the woman had developed over 61 years of managing rooms, of redirecting conversations that were moving in directions she had not planned. She set her wine glass down and folded her hands in her lap and looked at Claire with the composed expression of someone who was refusing to believe the ground had shifted. I think there may be some confusion, Georgette said. This was a routine legal document. Our attorney prepared it in the interest of making sure everyone's interests are protected. Everyone's interests, Claire said. Of course, Georgette said. Including mine, Claire said. Georgette did not answer that. Harlan had picked up the one-page summary from Lattice Point. He was reading it with the expression of a man who was hoping that a second reading would make the words say something different. They did not. This is a complex financial instrument, he said. The relationship you are describing is indirect at best. I am not certain the connection you are implying is as straightforward as you suggest. Your financing arrangement with Penway has been structured the same way for 22 months, Claire said. The fund's ownership documentation is filed with the state regulatory office. Lattice Point's position in the fund is a matter of record. I am happy to walk you through the chain if you would like. I have additional documentation in this folder. Harlan set the summary down. Sutton picked up the postnuptial agreement and put it back in the envelope. She did this without speaking and with the careful movements of someone who was trying to appear calm. The envelope went into the bag beside her chair. 3 of the cousins at the far end of the table had stopped talking. Bart Neely was looking at the wall. Preston had not moved. He was sitting very still beside Claire, and she could feel the particular quality of his stillness, the stillness of someone who had just understood something large and was not yet sure what to do with it. I want to be clear about a few things, Claire said. She was still speaking to the table, still unhurried. The postnuptial agreement as written would not hold up in Connecticut courts, given the documented separation of my premarital and marital assets, and the fact that my company's core intellectual property predates this marriage by 4 years. My attorney has already reviewed it. That is settled. She looked at Georgette. What I want to address is not the legal question. The legal question is simple. What I want to address is the fact that you had this prepared, notarized, and brought to this table on a holiday, and you asked me to sign it before dessert, and the assumption behind all of that is that I would not know what I was signing or what it was worth. The room was absolutely still. I know exactly what I am worth, Claire said. I have always known. I have sat at this table for 3 years and answered the questions I was asked and not corrected the assumptions that were made about me because that was my choice and it served my purposes. But I want to be clear. It was a choice, not a condition. Georgette's composure was still in place, but it had the look of composure that was being maintained by force. "I think," Georgette said slowly, "that you have made your point." "I have," Claire said. "Yes." She folded the lattice point summary and put it back in her folder. She closed the folder. She picked up her fork and finished what was on her plate. She was not hungry, but she was not going to leave the table early. She was going to sit through dessert. She was going to be pleasant to the cousins and thank the staff who had cooked the meal, and she was going to leave at the time she had planned to leave. Which is exactly what she did. The guests moved to the sitting room after dinner. Claire stayed at the table for a few minutes, stacking plates the way her mother had always done, the way you did when you wanted a moment alone in a room. When she carried the plates to the kitchen, Preston followed her. She had expected this. She set the plates on the counter near the sink and turned around. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with his hands in his pockets. He looked like he had aged since dinner started. "I did not know," he said. "About the Postnup," she said. "Any of it," he said. "The Postnup, what you had built, the fund, all of it, I did not know." "I know you did not know about the fund," she said. "That was coincidence, not planning. The rest of it you did not know because you did not ask." He absorbed that. "You never told me how big the company had gotten," he said. "You never asked," she said. "Not once in 3 years did you ask me for a number. Not a revenue figure, not a valuation, not a headcount. You knew I ran a company. You said you were proud of me, but you did not ask. I thought you would tell me when you wanted me to know." "I was waiting for you to want to know," she said. "There is a difference." He was quiet for a moment. "What about my family?" he said. "The way they have treated you, did you know I knew?" "Yes," she said. "And you never said anything." "I said things," she said. "Once in the first year, twice in the second. You said you would talk to your mother. You did not. I stopped saying things." He sat down at the kitchen table. He pressed his hands flat on the surface and looked at them. "I should have," he said. "I know I should have. I am telling you now that I know that." "I know you know," she said. "That is not the question." "What is the question?" She looked at him. "The question is what knowing it is worth now," she said. "After 3 years. Tonight, with your family in the next room and your father about to have a very serious problem and your sister with the Postnup in her bag. What does knowing it now change?" He opened his mouth. He closed it. "Preston," she said quietly, "I filed for divorce this morning." He looked up. She had thought about what she would feel when she said those words out loud to him. She had thought she might feel relief or grief or the particular hollowness of closing a door. What she actually felt was nothing she had a word for. It was not cold. It was not warm. It was the feeling of something that had already happened being confirmed. "Claire," he said. "I am not angry," she said. "I want you to know that. I am not doing this from anger. I am doing this because I spent 3 years waiting for something to change and it did not change, and I am not going to spend 3 more years in the same room." "I will fix it," he said. "I will talk to them, tonight, right now. I will go in there and I will say what I should have said 2 years ago." She looked at him for a long moment. "I believe you," she said. "I think if I stayed you would try. I think you would do better. But I do not want better. I deserved right, from the beginning. And that is not something you can fix backward." He did not argue. She had said the true thing and he knew it was true, which was one of the things she had loved about him, that he could not pretend when she gave him the true thing. She picked up her bag from the counter. "Take care of yourself," she said. "I mean that." "I know you do," he said. She left him at the table. The night air outside the Ashford house was cold and clear, the way Connecticut evenings were in November, the kind of cold that made everything look very sharp and precise. Claire came through the front door and pulled her coat closed and walked down the front steps. The private drive curved away from the house toward the road. It was lined with old maples that had gone bare. Her car was parked near the curve. There was a black sedan she did not recognize parked 20 feet behind it. As she walked toward her car, the sedan's door opened and a woman got out. 40s, Asian American, dark coat, the particular posture of someone who had been sitting in a car for several hours and was very good at not showing it. "Ms. Beaumont," the woman said. "Agent Wu," Claire said. They shook hands. It was a brief, professional handshake. "Thank you for your cooperation through this process," Agent Wu said. "Your firm's compliance documentation was the final element we needed. We have been ready since Tuesday." "I know," Claire said. "Renata told me." Agent Wu looked toward the house. There was a second car parked further back on the drive, dark, visible now that Claire was looking for it. "We have a warrant," Agent Wu said. "We will be going inside shortly. You are not required to be present for that." "I am not planning to be," Claire said. Agent Wu nodded. "For what it is worth," she said, "the inquiry into Mr. Ashford's filing practices has been ongoing for 11 months. What your firm identified and reported accelerated our timeline significantly. He has been structuring his financing disclosures in a way that misrepresents the risk profile to state regulators. The harm is real and it has been ongoing." "I know," Claire said. "I wanted you to know that what you did mattered," Agent Wu said. "You could have looked away." "I could not have, actually," Claire said. "Once I knew, I could not have looked away." Agent Wu studied her for a moment. Then she nodded once, the way people nodded when they recognized something they respected. "Drive safe," she said. Claire unlocked her car. She put her bag on the passenger seat. She started the engine and sat for a moment with the heat coming on, looking through the windshield at the maple trees, at the shape of the house beyond them with its lit windows. She heard the front door of the house open. She did not turn to look. She heard Georgette's voice, sharp and climbing, the way it had never been at a dinner table but was now, and then a man's voice she did not recognize, measured and flat with authority, and then Harlan's voice, which she heard only briefly before the door closed again. She put the car in drive. She did not look in the rearview mirror as she pulled down the drive. She turned onto the road, and the Ashford house disappeared behind the trees. She called Renata. "It is done," she said. "How do you feel?" Renata asked. "Like I am driving home," Claire said. "That is a good answer," Renata said. Claire drove. The Defense Technology Leadership Forum was held every spring at a conference center near the National Mall in Washington, D.C. It was not a flashy event. It did not have celebrity presenters or a red carpet or a social media presence worth mentioning. It was attended by engineers and program managers and procurement officers and the founders of firms that built systems that most people would never know existed. It was the most important gathering in Clare's industry, and winning its founders' award was the closest thing her world had to a standing ovation. She had been nominated in January. She had found out she won in March. She had told Renata, who had said, "Obviously," and then started planning the trip. The divorce had been finalized in February, 10 weeks after Thanksgiving. It had been clean and fast, as Dr. Holt had promised. Preston had not contested anything. The settlement was straightforward. They had divided what was marital and left everything else where it belonged. He had called her once in January, not to argue but to say that he hoped she was doing well and that he was sorry and that he meant both things. She had said she knew and that she appreciated it and that she wished him well. That was the last time they spoke. Harlan had been charged in December with federal securities fraud and 2 related counts. The case was moving through the courts. His Meridian Tower financing had been frozen pending the outcome. Georgette had issued no statement. Sutton had deactivated her public social media accounts. Sentinel Arc had signed its 4th federal contract in January. It was the largest in the company's history, a 7-year security architecture framework contract worth $900 million. The announcement had run in 4 national business publications. The company now had 204 employees. Claire walked onto the stage at the Defense Technology Leadership Forum on a Tuesday in April. She was wearing a royal blue blazer and matching trousers, tailored precise. Her natural hair was out for the first time on a public stage. She had decided this in January and had not second-guessed it. She had thought briefly about what Georgette would think of the way she looked up here. She had let the thought pass through without holding it. The front row of the audience was Renata, who had worn a green blazer and was sitting very straight. 2 seats to Renata's left was Judge Wallace Bream, who was 73 now and had flown in from Richmond for this. He had gotten here 40 minutes early. When Claire had found him in the lobby before the program started, he had hugged her and said, "I told you," and she had said, "You told me," and that was the whole of it. Priya from her legal team was 4 rows back. 3 engineers from the original Sentinel Arc team who had been with her since Falls Church were in the center section. Claire had seen them when she walked past and had stopped and shaken their hands. The forum director, a lean woman in her 50s named Constance Park, introduced Claire with the kind of specificity that told you she had actually read the file. She talked about Sentinel Arc's technical contributions. She talked about the patent portfolio. She talked about the contracts. She did not mention the marriage or the Ashfords or Thanksgiving or any of the things that had happened in the previous 6 months, because this was not that kind of stage. This stage was about what Claire had built. Claire stepped to the podium. She held the award in her right hand. It was a simple thing, a rectangular piece of dark blue glass with her name etched into it and the year and the forum seal. It was not heavy. It felt exact, the right size for what it represented. She looked out at the room. "I spent a long time," she said, "in rooms where nobody asked me the right question. I used that time. I used every hour of it. And I want to say this to anyone in this room who has been in a place like that. The work does not stop because the room does not see it. You keep building. You know what you are building. That is enough." She paused. "I had very good help," she said, "from people who saw the work and did not need to be told what it was. You know who you are." She looked at Judge Bream. He nodded. She looked at Renata, who did not cry because Renata did not cry, but whose expression said everything that crying would have said. "Thank you," Claire said. The room was on its feet before she stepped back from the podium. She walked off the stage and into the wing, where it was quiet and dim. She held the award with both hands. She stood there for a moment alone in the good silence of a thing that was finished. Then she straightened her jacket. Then she went back out to find her people. And